Hey,
Hi, hello.
it's not Halloween.
I know.
Who are you supposed to be?
Well, since you're the inquiring type, my name is Lady Catherine Avington of Claywolf Abbey, and
You that girl from Django Unchained?
I beg your pardon?
Django Unchained, you know that slave movie?
Uh,
That slave movie?
Yeah.
I mean, I swear you look dead on just like her.
You know, it's funny, a lot of people think that Victorian dress, which is what I am in, looks a lot like American Wild
Hey,
West.
Bill, doesn't she look like that girl from Django Unchained?
Yeah.
Well, no, here's the thing. I thought you would have seen it because I swear you're dressed just like her.
Okay, I hate to quibble, I really do, but this is not an American costume, okay? I'm just a regular Victorian lady from Derbyshire, England. So,
It doesn't make any sense.
why not?
Because you're blood.
A bit old to be unmarried. I know, my parents are absolute fits about it.
No, but you can't be from Downtown Abbey or Pride and Prejudice or whatever. I mean, there's just
Okay, well, setting aside the fact that those are vastly different timelines, obviously, why not?
because.
So I'm very well aware of the almost bittersweet irony of what it is to be a black girl who's really obsessed and enamored with historical fashion and costume, particularly Western historical fashion. It never once does not cross my mind that everything I love about the 17th through 19th century in terms of fashion, from the embroidery to the hoop skirts to the textile manipulation, the corsetry, all of those things would not have been possible without the blood and sweat of people in color. But yet I still really enjoy these time periods. I love the Baroque, I love Rococo, I love Regency the most. I am constantly researching and learning about historical construction methods. I admire the really green and like eco-conscious sustainable approach they had to the way they made clothes, the emphasis on quality that we no longer have today just because things were handmade for so long. Just the elaborateness of it all. I mainline all of that stuff hard, but as much as this is one of the things that I enjoy most in the world, and it is my favorite hobby, and it is obviously definitely something I partake in just as a break from the way that imperialism and colonialism and white supremacy is already a constant burden in my life. Like, even in my hobbies, I cannot escape the fact that being black and being woman is almost a curse in the world and society we live in. As much as I enjoy this hobby, I also never see myself represented in it, ever. I love cosplay, I follow a lot of cosplayers. When people, as a hobby, reimagine themselves as duchesses and ladies and viscountesses in these periods, I still very rarely see anyone who looks like me either. So you can obviously imagine my absolute joy and excitement when Bridgerton was first announced. Not only because it was I always enjoy a good historical drama, but not only that, but it was a historical drama set in one of my favorite fashion history periods, the Regency era, and it had black people in it, and black people who weren't slaves, who weren't servants. I saw dark-skinned black women in the trailers with giant wigs. They have a black queen. Like, this is literally everything I've wanted. Like, you know how everyone's always like, who asked for this? Like me, I have been the person asking for an 18th, 17th or 19th century drama with black people. And another thing that I really liked and appreciate about this is that despite everything that like the majority of our mass media likes to tell us, black people did exist before the 1960s, and they did exist outside of slavery. And I'm not just referring to pre-colonial Africa and the Moors and what was happening before the scramble for Africa and, you know, the creation of things like the Commonwealth and all the tyranny of the Victorian era and your King Leopold. Even in the early 19th century, black people were present in England. In the 18th century, there was evidence of black nobility. So one, it is a falsehood to assume that like black people were only ever slaves. And on top of that, a lot of period dramas, especially something like Bridgerton, are also under the guise of fantasy. It's historical in the fact that it is set in 1813, but it is not in any way trying to tell the real life events of 1813. And I always find it so interesting that in fantasy, particularly sort of historical fantasy, we can imagine worlds with elves and dragon queens and wizarding schools, but the idea of black people existing outside of servitude and oppression is just too fantastical and too out there. So to see the Bridgerton trailer and to basically hear of the concept where it is an alternate universe where black and white people coexist in upper class society, where there is a black woman on the throne, was one of the most thrilling things that could happen to me. But as always, I have been hoodwinked, bamboozled, deceived, tricked, and lied to. What had excited me the most about Bridgerton when I'd started in episode 1 was that I thought it was really going to be like colorblind casting, sort of like the Roger and Hammerstein's version of Cinderella, with Brandy as Cinderella and Whitney Houston as the fairy godmother, and there's a Filipino prince whose mom is Whoopi Goldberg and a white man. Because people love to talk about meritocracy all the time, and whenever we bring up diversity and inclusion, everyone's always like, people should just get the job because they deserve it. And I was like, wow, that's what they actually did with Bridgerton, you know. It seemed that people were being cast just because of how good an actor they were, and that was so refreshing to me. And I actually liked the idea that the show wasn't going to so overtly dress race. It was just going to be 1813 London, England, a romance drama, and people just happened to be of color. And also, as a black person, I also would like to see representations of black people on screen that aren't always so clouded or surrounded in racism. Like, sometimes I would just like to see black people just being, because you know, black people just, they be sometimes. And that's what I was hoping Bridgerton was going to do, but Bridgerton really, it failed on a lot of points. I don't think Bridgerton is entirely bad. There's a lot of interesting things going on there, and I appreciate that someone dared to put black people in historical drama outside of a slavery role. And anyway, so I thought it would be interesting if we would address the way Bridgerton has handled diversity and tokenism and race and colorism while we make a Regency era reticule. Because also, while I was watching Bridgerton, I noticed a surprising lack of reticules. And for those of you who don't know, a reticule is basically like one of the earlier versions of the handbag. So before the Regency Georgian era, women used to have pockets. They would have these pocket bags that they would tie under their skirts, and they would be quite big, and that is where they would store all their stuff, I guess. I don't know what people used to carry before cell phones and credit cards, but once we got to the Georgian and Regency era, which falls under the Georgian era, the waistline started to rise up. And because they were rising to the empire waistline, so that is like your underbust, there wasn't really a place for women to carry their pockets anymore. So that's when they started carrying their pockets on the outside, and they became reticules and all these really lovely and interesting and beautiful intricate bags. And I was a bit disappointed to not see that in the costume design of Bridgerton, which by mostly I liked. So we're gonna make one today while we discuss where Bridgerton went right and where Bridgerton went wrong. So I've already made a little medallion for my reticule. I'm going to be making a round reticule, which I think was around during the time Bridgerton was set in. And I've got these two satin fabrics, and I'm going to be sort of copying some examples that I've seen on the Met Museum. And I've chosen this like lilac-y color just to sort of represent the Duke of Hastings' house, because that does kind of come to be their color later in the show. As Daphne, her family's color is blue, and then she marries Duke of Hastings, and his family color is red, and red, blue, you know, purple, which is like a nice subtle thing I really enjoyed in the costume design of the show. So I'm following instructions from the from an actual book from the time which details how to make a reticule, which I thought, you know, would be fun to actually do something almost in historical practice. But the Regency era was pre-sewing machine era, but I don't really have the time right now to completely hand sew this thing. So I'm going to quickly stitch together my lining and stuff. And Bridgerton is set in the year 1813 in London, England. But like from the jump, you already get the idea that this is a sort of an alternate universe or just a reimagining of this time in history, which was really cool. And there's some really lovely elements, like they incorporate like a lot of very contemporary modern fabrics into the costume design. So they keep the historical Regency silhouettes, but they sort of, they add a contemporary flair to it. A string quartet plays Thank You Next by Ariana Grande. So the Georgian era was from 1714 to 1837, and the Regency era is specifically the time of 1811 to 1820, which Bridgerton then falls into, where due to his mental illness, I believe it was, Mad King George III was not really able to govern the country, and his son, King George IV, became the Prince Regent, and then he would later become king, and that's why it is called the Regency era. And yeah, so Queen Charlotte was the real life queen during this time, and it was very interesting that they also went with the choice of casting a black woman to play her, as there is a lot of like speculation that she had, that in real life Queen Charlotte had mixed race heritage. So historian Malde de Valdez E. Kirkham, I'm so sorry about that, argues that Charlotte was directly descended from a black branch of the Portuguese royal family, Alfonso III and his concubine Oruana, a black Moor. According to Valdez, one of their sons, Martin Alfonso, married into the noble de Souza family, which also had black ancestry. Thus, Charlotte had African blood from both families. He discovered that the royal physician, Baron Christian Friedrich Stockmar, had described Charlotte as small and crooked with a true mulatto face. A lot of people considered her quite ugly. And to me, most historical people are kind of ugly, to be honest. She looks pretty much like most of Western aristocracy at the time, except that I think what has made people sort of say that she was plain or just downright ugly is the fact that she does have a few sort of African features, and I don't want to get into a whole thing about how complicated and complex the idea of Eurocentric and Afrocentric features are. I mean, she's got a bit of a wide nose, she's got some thick lips, her hair is giving me a little bit of 3C vibes in her portraits and stuff. So I definitely don't have an issue believing that there is African ancestry in her blood. I do think it is a bit too far removed to fully consider her mixed race or biracial or half black. Then that would also mean that Queen Victoria and the rest of her descendants all the way today to Queen Elizabeth, Prince Harry, William, all of them then are a bunch of mulattoes. Anyways, that is all to say that I enjoyed the choice that they made to make Queen Charlotte black. Not only is it it's nice to see a black woman in a seat of power, but I thought it was a nice fun nod to her rumored ancestry. The showrunner himself had actually said that the choice to cast black people in these roles was very deliberate. They did want to bring up the topic of race in the show, which actually I really genuinely was not expecting. I really thought they were going the colorblind casting route, and I kind of really wish they did. The way black women are handled in the show is problematic. The fact that the only times we see dark skin women and even other people of color, they are usually just background, they're props. They very rarely have speaking roles. I think I could count maybe on both hands the amount of dark-skinned black women, specifically dark-skinned black women with speaking roles and who have characters with names, and then at that just the amount of dark-skinned characters in general. And I do also think that the decision to only have, I think there was only one Indian woman the whole time in the show, and she's just there again. She's there just like basically every single person of color in the show. She's a plot device for the advancement of a white character story. There are a lot of us all over the world who've got a big gripe with the UK, and it would have been nice, almost like a reparations a bit, to have, all the different races of the colonies, be in the show and be nobility and be reimagined in a way that would have made your Queen Victorias and your Cecil Rhodes sick. And that goes to my main point. Every person of color in this show, the ones in positions of power, is essentially a villain. They get very little characterization. We learn very little about them. The way their stories are handled, it's so full of so much implicit bias. And I just don't understand why then make this sort of race-bent thing if you're just kind of going to cause as much harm as the more outwardly all white productions would. So basically, the only time we see dark-skinned black people in this show is when they are servants or lower class, or when they're villains. Or, I mean, okay, Lady Danbury, she is a main character. She is a darker-skinned black woman. And yeah, she's not necessarily a villain, but she is a plot device. Because also in the society, Queen Charlotte, through the pure magic of her WAP, ended racism in the UK. In episode 4, Lady Danbury says to Simon, "I understand you believe such subjects as love and devotion, affection and attachment. You find it all trite and frivolous. But have you any idea those very things are precisely what have allowed a new day to begin to dawn in the society? Look at our queen. Look at our king. Look at their marriage. Look at everything it is doing for us, allowing us to become. We were two separate societies divided by color until a king fell in love with one of us. Love, Your Grace, conquers all." And interestingly enough, in this universe, slavery did happen, so slavery still exists. So it is really heavily implied that once Queen Charlotte got married to King George, he essentially abolished slavery and handed out titles and land to black people and promoted them to upper class and gentry, which is just a lot of freaking hogwash. Like, I think it is so problematic to create this narrative where romantic love can conquer racism. And in 1813, slavery was still very rampant in the world. Granted, I think it was illegal to buy and sell slaves in England at this time, but it was still legal to own slaves. And even if they were free people, black people in the UK had a hard time finding work because they were discriminated against. And I just think it was so lazy that just because this one man married this one black woman, that everyone in society sort of just got over whatever racist notions they had. There are points where the show sort of plays at it, but they're so scared to go the full way with it. Like, I think it would have been very interesting if maybe the reason that Anthony is so against Simon and Daphne's union is because he's actually, as much as Simon is his friend, he's a little bit racist and he doesn't feel like his precious baby sister should be with a black man. That would have added a lot more nuance to it, because honestly, his reasoning for not wanting them to get together, the fact that like Simon is a rake and I guess like just a bit of a slut, it wasn't that compelling. I think it would have been more compelling if it was a bit racist. And I'm not saying that every character in the show should have been a bigot or should have had to overcome a lot of preconceived notions, but if this is the setting you're going to use where an interracial union absolves racism, then I would have liked to at least seen the main couple of the story, which is an interracial couple, maybe sort of tackle the topic of race, because that is something that does come up in an interracial relationship. Like, you'd be a fool to think that you could date someone of another race and never have a conversation, like a serious conversation about it. Like, that is just a recipe for chaos. Queen Charlotte is, she's a black character. She eventually meddles in the marriage and the romance of Simon and Daphne, essentially getting in the way of something Daphne, a white character, wants. She becomes an obstacle that Daphne must overcome. And even when we are given a bit of nuance and characterization to Queen Charlotte, it's all in service of making us understand why she would be so moved by Simon's "I fell in love with my best friend" speech, because we see that, her and King George their romance is a love match and it's founded on friendship. We don't learn anything real about Queen Charlotte in order to understand Charlotte better. We learn a bit more about her in order to service the story of the interracial couple, specifically the white woman in that interracial couple. Lady Danbury is around and all she wants is to uplift Simon and, help him see that love is the way and love is the light. And that's great and all, but we never learn anything substantial about her. Like, how is she in such a high position? What was her friendship with Simon's mom like? What does she do all the time? Why isn't she married? Like, she's one of the more interesting characters in the show, and we learn virtually nothing about her. Her entire purpose is to be there to gossip or to meddle or to throw parties or to offer Simon advice that he doesn't want to take. And then I think the character treated the worst of all is Marina Thompson. So Marina Thompson is the sort of only young black woman we see with a speaking role. Don't know why we couldn't have had Marina Thompson be a dark-skinned woman, which isn't to say that, the actress doesn't deserve the job. I'm just saying that because when Marina's character enters the show, she is considered one of the most desirable women in town. She has a line of suitors every day coming to her. And I just imagine how powerful something like that would have been if it was a dark-skinned black girl who was the jewel of the season. I mean, maybe I should be glad that it wasn't a dark-skinned black girl. First of all, for the first few episodes, you won't even really realize she's there. And she starts out as an obstacle not only to the women of the Featherington household, who now have more competition during the matchmaking season, but she is an obstacle again to our white woman main character, because now she's getting all the attention of the suitors. And then on top of that, if it wasn't for the fact that everyone keeps telling us how much everyone thinks that Marina is hot, you would not remember her. She's given absolutely no character, no personality. And then all of a sudden, once we discover that she's pregnant, and so as such she needs to get married fast, she kind of becomes a villain out of nowhere. So she goes from having absolutely no characterization at all. All of a sudden she's conniving and manipulative, and she's so aggressive in wanting to get a marriage. She goes from being this poor girl who's just thrown into living with her wealthy family, and she's now thrust into a position by her aunt where she must find a match, because otherwise she's going to be thrown out on the streets. Basically, she's a hurdle in Penelope's unrequited crush with Colin Bridgerton. She's manipulative. We were kind of made to feel like her quest to get Colin to fall in love with her is really evil, when I think there was a very interesting and nuanced way that could have been handled. And I already didn't enjoy that our main young black woman character basically has to go through this stereotypical archetype of having baby mama drama. She's got a bum baby daddy, and she's unmarried, and she's this close to being sent to the hood. That was a bit disappointing. No, there's nothing wrong with a cliche, because cliches are based in truth at the end of the day, and there are always interesting ways to handle it. Again, what I said, the show is so scared to fully lean into the race issue, but then they try to sort of half-ass it, which I just think ends up being more problematic, because there is a point where she is yelling at Lady Featherington, where she's like, you could not understand what it's like to be here, and she basically sort of speaks about how she feels so inferior, and she's surrounded by all these people who think they're above her, and I guess you could look at that as she's speaking about the fact that she is the black girl in this predominantly white society, and she's in this predominantly white household, and no one is around who could sympathize with what her experience is like. But you could also read her saying that as her speaking about what it's like to be a poor country girl surrounded by the upper class, when I think it would have been much interesting to really just play her as a black girl with very few options, because she is black, even as much as she has access to all this money and power, and who's unfortunately been left in the lurch, and she's trying to make the best of a really bad situation. At no point in the show are we really given any real reason as to why Colin is so in love with her and so willing to marry her so quickly. We spent so much time on Daphne and Simon's dry, crusty, boring courtship. We spent so much time on that dry-ass storyline, which I think is probably the second least interesting storyline in the whole show. Simon and Daphne have very little chemistry, to be honest. I never felt any of that burning desire they claim to have to each other. And it's just a shame that we spent so much time on that dry-ass storyline, when it would have been nice to see what it is about Marina that make people like her. So what was it about Marina specifically that made him ready to risk it all? We never get to see that. It's very disappointing that the black women in the show don't actually get to have any real romance. Queen Charlotte's husband is sick. We see them interact in one episode for 3 minutes. Lady Danbury is never attached to any sort of male or woman. There's no sexual aspect to her. She is just a mammy figure who's there to, the male she's attached to is basically her surrogate son. And then Marina, even when she does have suitors, we never get to enjoy the thrill, because that is also the thrill of romantic period dramas, is the absolute slow burn and the anguish and the longing of it all. in terms of romance, that is the selling point of this genre, and we don't even get to see a black girl in that position. Why are we denied that sort of fantasy? And even if it is based on the fact, even if maybe she doesn't feel anything for Colin, it would have been nice to see more of him trying to woo her, more of him seeing her personality and falling in love with her, because that's also the biggest thing about a lot of period romance is, at the end of the day, the characters always want to be loved for who they are, because society has all these impositions, especially when it comes to matters of class. You know, a lot of what these stories are is just this plea that please take me for who I am and love me as I am. I know society has told you that things have to be this way and that way, but like, can you take the step? Can you be courageous enough to love me, to gobble on me, to drip on me? And then when it comes to the dark skin representation, one of the prominent dark skin characters we see is Simon's father, who's a dark skinned black man, the former Duke of Hastings. And guess what? He's a freaking villain. He is an op, alright? He's abusive and violent with Simon as a kid. He's a terrible character. And again, the darker skinned people in the show are always mean to the white people or the lighter skinned characters. So not only is he mean to his little light skinned son, but he's terrible to his light skinned wife. And which is fine. Listen, I'm in no way saying that like black people cannot be antagonists in a story. And I think there could have something really interesting could have happened in the story if maybe they sort of provided more nuance to the fact that perhaps Simon's father was so adamant about having this legacy and so adamant about having a extraordinary son without a disability, or the fact that he was so ashamed of Simon's disability had to do with the fact that maybe he is one of the few black dukes in London. And it would bring up that theme of how, as a black person, you have to work twice as hard to be considered at the same level that white people just get to exist in just by being born. And I think that would have added a lot more nuance and complexity and interest to that storyline. But no, we just kind of get the idea that Simon's dad is just being mean to be mean. That was actually what made me want to stop watching the show. During my first watch, when I learned that his motivation for not wanting to have children and a family was just because his dad was mean to him, and it would have been really spiteful to his dad. And there was so much potential as well. I think maybe if they just leaned into having more black women in the show, and like I particularly enjoyed how deliberate the show's hair designer was with Queen Charlotte's wigs. Even though I do kind of wish that deliberateness had been extended to plucking Lady Danbury's hairline on her wig, and also doing a bit more with Marina's hair, which is her natural hair. But I'm not really impressed by a light-skinned woman with 3C curls having them out, even if it is put up in a bit of a beehive. And I do understand that it does make sense for the character, particularly because they did such an excellent job with Queen Charlotte's wigs. And I did read some interviews with the hair designer, and he took the time to really put his foot into those wigs. He said he did pull inspiration not only from sort of period accurate hairstyles, but from contemporary black women like Beyonce when she was playing Foxy Cleopatra in Austin Powers. And that's where we see that one gigantic afro. And I was like, it was really so delightful to see someone reimagining these these very Western historical hairstyles in dreadlocks, in afros, in this almost 4C textures. And I really enjoyed that there was actual effort put into really building that aesthetic, meeting sort of historical accuracy or this historical reference with blackness. That I want to give to the show's credit was freaking fantastic. What the bag is supposed to look like, and I will. Okay, but it's fine. Which is fine, but it's cool. I'm gonna try salvage this tonight. Yeah, anyway. I don't think anyone in media or whatever owes me a Regency drama with black people in it. But I do think that if you want to take the moment and you want to do something that's never been done before, then I think you should really fully commit. And that's all I wish that Bridgerton had done. I wish they had really actually just gone full on out and actually addressed race and colorism and everything with nuance and with the kind of care it deserves. I wish they had treated the black woman characters so much better. And I look forward, I look forward to holding my thumbs and hoping that, you know, I'm not just going to be given diversity so I can shut up. I'm going to be given what is actually, inclusive and thoughtful like diversity in my television, because I think we all deserve that. I think it is so important that as people of color, as women, as black women specifically, that like we get to see depictions of ourselves that are dignified, that are regal, that are interesting. And it's in the fantasy genre. You really are allowed to do anything you want. God, please get my laptop. And that's about that. Anyway, so if you've made it this far, I don't know how long this video is going to be. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Maybe there'll be a clip of me coming back where I've solved this issue. And yeah, and I think, yeah. So, I'm sort of done. And here she is. Kind of full of cat toys, but yeah, I accidentally just made a tiny little like scrunchy bag, which I'm not mad at. It's kind of cute, but it's definitely not what I had planned to do. So that's cool. So yeah, I know I said I was going to be making a round Regency reticule following instructions from 1831. And you know that this video was gonna be watching me make this bag, and it wasn't. And yeah, basically I'd kind of led you in promising one thing, and the end product is almost but not quite the thing I had set out to do. And I think that's a pretty good metaphor for Bridgerton. Oh my god, that's literally a really good metaphor. It's actually a really good metaphor for Bridgerton. Because also at the end, it's still kind of cute to look at, and it's not terrible, but it's definitely not always intended. So, yeah.